Some losses run so deep, you'd rather face a frozen wilderness alone than live another day pretending to be whole. That's where 62-year-old Jocey Flint found herself after her husband died, holed up in an abandoned Idaho cabin, wanting nothing but silence and the mercy of being forgotten. Then a black wolf showed up at her door, starving, limping, with 3 tiny pups trailing behind. The wolf didn't attack. She just stood there and waited, like she was asking for something Jocey thought she'd lost forever: the ability to care. One snowy night, Jocey opened that door. What happened next changed both their lives. Can a broken woman and a desperate wolf find healing together before the outside world tears them apart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin smelled like abandonment when Jocey Flint first pushed open its warped door 3 weeks after Malcolm's funeral. Dust motes spun in the pale October light, filtering through cracked windows. Mouse droppings littered the floor. The potbelly stove squatted in the corner, its belly full of old ash and the brittle husks of paper wasps' nests. She set down her pack and stood in the doorway, breathing in the cold scent of pine and decay. This was exactly what she wanted. Nothing. No one. Just the mountains and the silence that stretched between them like a promise. Malcolm's leather-bound field journal pressed against her ribs from the inside pocket of her coat. She'd carried it every day since the hospital, since the moment the doctor had said, "Massive coronary, and nothing we could do," and all those other words that meant her husband of 38 years was gone before she'd even finished her morning coffee. The journal still held his handwriting, his observations about elk migration patterns and the places where black bears denned in winter. It held everything except him. Jocey had been a wildlife tracker for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game for 27 years before she retired. Malcolm had worked beside her for most of that time, his steady presence as reliable as the sunrise. They'd never had children. One miscarriage early in their marriage had decided that for them, but they'd had the wilderness. They'd had each other. They'd tracked wolves and mountain lions, documented migration routes, set up camera traps in places where humans rarely ventured. They'd built a life out of patience and observation, out of respect for things that couldn't be tamed. Now Malcolm was ash in an urn on her sister's mantel in Boise, and Jocey was here, in a cabin they'd discovered years ago during a tracking expedition. It sat on the eastern edge of the Bitterroot Range, accessible only by a rutted logging road that hadn't seen timber trucks in 15 years. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles away. The nearest town, Pine Ridge, was a 2-hour drive on roads that became impassable once the snow started falling in earnest. She spent the first week making the cabin habitable, swept out the mouse nests and wasp husks, patched the worst holes in the roof with a tarp and roofing tar she'd brought in her truck, split firewood until her shoulders burned and her hands blistered. The physical labor felt good. It kept her from thinking about the empty house back in Boise, the well-meaning neighbors who kept bringing casseroles, her sister's gentle insistence that grief required processing and community, and all those other things Jocey had no patience for. She set traps for rabbits and squirrels, fished the creek that ran cold and clear behind the cabin, rationed her supplies carefully: flour, rice, canned goods, coffee. She figured she could make it through winter if she was smart about it. And if she couldn't, well, that didn't seem like the worst outcome either. The forest in late autumn was a study in letting go. Aspens dropped their golden leaves like tears. The undergrowth died back to reveal the bones of the landscape: granite outcroppings, fallen logs soft with rot, game trails worn deep into the earth by generations of deer and elk, Jocey walked these trails every day, Malcolm's binoculars around her neck, his journal in her pocket. She wasn't tracking anything in particular. She was just walking, just breathing, just trying to figure out how to exist in a world where Malcolm didn't. She first saw the wolf on her 9th day at the cabin. It was dusk, that in-between time when the light turns blue and uncertain. Jocey was checking her trap line along the creek when movement caught her eye. She froze, hand going automatically to the canister of bear spray on her belt. But it wasn't a bear. The wolf stood perhaps 60 yards away, just at the edge of the tree line, black as midnight, lean, watchful. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them that Jocey couldn't name. Not threat, exactly. Not greeting either. Just acknowledgement. I see you. You see me. We're both here. Then the wolf melted back into the forest, and Jocey was left wondering if she'd imagined it. But she hadn't. The wolf came back. Over the next week, Jocey saw it 3 more times. Always at dusk. Always at a distance. Always watching. She studied it through Malcolm's binoculars, her professional instincts kicking in despite herself. Female, she decided. Maybe 4 or 5 years old. Underweight, which wasn't unusual for this time of year, but more pronounced than it should be. And something else, a hitch in the wolf's gait when she moved. An injury, old but permanent. The wolf never approached the cabin directly. She stayed in the forest, a shadow among shadows. But she was there, deliberately there. And that wasn't normal. Wolves were wary of humans, especially in Idaho where hunting them was legal. They avoided human habitation, human scent, human presence. Malcolm used to say that a wolf that lost its fear of people was either sick, starving, or had been raised by humans. Those were the only exceptions. Jocey began leaving her cabin door open during the day while she worked outside, splitting wood or hanging clothes to dry or reinforcing the patches in the roof. She could feel the wolf watching from the forest. Once, she turned quickly and caught a glimpse of movement. Not just one shape, but several. Smaller shapes. Pups. Her heart clenched. A mother with pups this late in the season, and injured. That changed everything. She tried to tell herself it wasn't her problem. The wild sorted itself out. Predators died. Their offspring died. That was nature, red in tooth and claw, just like Malcolm used to quote from that old poem. Interference only made things worse. She'd seen well-meaning people do damage by trying to help wildlife. She'd written reports about it. She knew better. But knowing better didn't stop her from setting aside scraps when she cleaned the rabbits from her traps. Didn't stop her from leaving those scraps on a flat rock 50 yards from her cabin, where the wolf could find them without coming too close. The food was always gone by morning. On the 15th day, the wolf came closer. Jocey was sitting on the cabin's narrow porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, and drinking coffee so weak it barely colored the water. She'd been rationing everything, including her coffee supply, and the thin brew was a poor substitute for the strong black stuff Malcolm used to make every morning. But it was warm, and it gave her something to do with her hands. Movement at the edge of the clearing made her freeze, cup halfway to her lips. The wolf emerged from the tree line, limping heavily on her right hind leg. Behind her came 3 pups, their legs too long for their bodies, their movements uncertain. They were young, maybe 4 months old, Jocey estimated. Born in the spring, old enough to be weaned but not old enough to hunt effectively. Not old enough to survive on their own. The mother wolf stopped 30 yards from the porch. She looked directly at Jocey, and in her yellow eyes was something Jocey recognized with a shock that went through her like cold water. Desperation. The pups huddled behind their mother, tails tucked, ears back. One of them, the smallest, swayed on its feet. They were starving, all of them, but especially the pups. Jocey set down her coffee cup, slowly, carefully. She didn't move otherwise. She barely breathed. The wolf took 3 more steps forward, close enough now that Jocey could see the ridge of her spine, the hollows around her ribs, close enough to see the thick band of missing fur around the wolf's neck, a collar of scar tissue that spoke of something Jocey didn't understand yet, but would. The wolf opened her mouth and made a sound Jocey had never heard from a wild wolf before. Not a growl or a howl, but a whine, high and thin and pleading. Then she turned and limped back into the forest, her pups following. She looked back once, yellow eyes finding Jocey's across the gathering darkness. Jocey sat on the porch until full dark, long after her coffee had gone cold. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else entirely. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her sleeping bag by the dying fire, listening to the wind move through the pines outside, and thought about Malcolm. About the miscarriage they'd never really talked about, the baby who'd come too early at 16 weeks and left a silence in their lives they'd filled with work and wilderness and each other, about the last thing Malcolm had said to her the morning he died, standing in their kitchen with his coffee mug in his hand. "Don't forget to live, Joss. Promise me that." She'd promised. Then she'd come here to hide. But the wolf wasn't hiding. The wolf was fighting, still fighting, even injured, even starving, for her young. Jocey pulled Malcolm's journal from under her makeshift pillow and ran her fingers over the worn leather cover. Inside, his careful script documented years of observations. In one entry, he'd written about a wolf they'd tracked that had lost its mate to hunters. The wolf had continued to care for its pups alone, adapting its hunting strategy, traveling farther, working harder. "Life doesn't stop because of loss," Malcolm had written. "It changes shape, continues anyway." Outside, snow began to fall, the first real snow of the season, fat flakes drifting down like thoughts. By morning, Jocey knew the world would be white. Winter was coming, and that wolf and her pups wouldn't survive it alone. She didn't decide exactly. Decision implied choice, and this felt more like inevitability, like something that had already happened, and she was just catching up to it. Jocey got up and added wood to the fire. Then she went to her food stores and pulled out 2 cans of tuna. Tomorrow, she'd set them out by the rock. Tomorrow, she'd see what happened. Tomorrow, everything would change. The snow fell steadily for 3 days, transforming the world into something pristine and unforgiving. Jocey woke on the 4th morning to an ominous silence, that particular quality of quiet that meant the storm had passed but left deep drifts in its wake. She pushed open the cabin door and found winter waiting. 2 feet of snow covered everything, erasing the familiar landmarks of her small clearing. The creek had vanished under white. Even the tree line seemed farther away, the forest transformed into a wall of dark trunks rising from an endless blanket. Jocey had left the tuna out the day before the storm hit, placing it near the flat rock where she'd been leaving scraps. She'd watched from the window as the snow began to fall, wondering if the wolf would come. She hadn't seen any movement. By evening, the cans had disappeared under the accumulating snow. Now, in the early morning light, she could see tracks, not just tracks, a trail of them, cutting across her clearing from the forest edge. They led to where she'd left the food, then away again. But there was something wrong with the pattern. The tracks were uneven, dragging in places, and there were smaller prints, too, barely visible in the disturbed snow. Jocey pulled on her boots and coat and followed the trail with her eyes. It led to the western side of her cabin, where she couldn't see from the windows. Her heart started beating faster. She grabbed Malcolm's binoculars and circled around to the cabin's blind side, moving carefully through the deep snow. The wolf lay against the cabin wall, her black fur stark against the white. The 3 pups were pressed against her, trying to burrow into her warmth. They were all dusted with snow, and they weren't moving. Jocey stopped breathing. Then the smallest pup lifted its head weakly, and she saw they were alive. Barely, but alive. She approached slowly, making herself small, non-threatening. The mother wolf's eyes opened. She didn't growl or snap. She just looked at Jocey with those yellow eyes, and in them was something beyond desperation, now. It was surrender, or trust. Maybe they were the same thing. "I know," Jocey said quietly. "I see you." She could see everything now in the clear morning light. The wolf's injury was worse than she'd thought. The right hind leg was twisted slightly, an old break that had healed wrong. The scar around her neck was thick and ropey, the fur grown back in patches. And when Jocey looked closer, she could see something else. A small section of the scar had something embedded in it, barely visible through the fur. Something metallic. The pups were in terrible shape. Their ribs showed through their thin fur. Their eyes were dull. The smallest one's breathing was shallow and rapid. They'd been out in the storm for days, burning what little energy they had left, just trying to stay warm. Jocey's professional training told her not to interfere. Her professional training told her that wild animals must remain wild, that human intervention caused more problems than it solved, that nature had to take its course. But her professional training had never watched a husband die in a hospital bed, had never felt the particular kind of emptiness that came from losing the person who made you feel less alone, had never understood what it meant to be a mother who would do anything, to save her young. She made her decision in a heartbeat. "Stay here," she told the wolf, as if the animal could understand. "I'm going to help." Jocey went back into the cabin and grabbed Malcolm's heavy wool blanket, the blue one he'd kept in his truck for emergencies. She brought it outside and knelt in the snow next to the smallest pup. The mother wolf watched but didn't move, didn't object. Jocey wrapped the pup carefully in the blanket, feeling how light it was, how its tiny heart raced against her hands. She carried it inside and set it near the fire, which she'd banked the night before, but was still giving off warmth. She went back for the other 2 pups. The mother wolf let her take them, one by one. Let this human stranger carry her babies away. It was the ultimate act of trust, and Jocey felt the weight of it in her chest like a stone. When all 3 pups were inside, arranged near the fire on the blanket, Jocey went back for the mother. "Your turn," she said. The wolf tried to stand, but couldn't. Her injured leg wouldn't hold her weight anymore. She'd pushed too hard, for too long, and her body had given out. Jocey didn't think about it. She just moved forward and slid her arms under the wolf's body, one arm under her chest, one under her haunches, mindful of the injured leg. The wolf was heavy, maybe 70 pounds, and Jocey's back protested as she lifted, but she'd carried heavier packs through rougher terrain. She could do this. The wolf didn't fight. She let herself be carried, her head resting against Jocey's shoulder, and Jocey could feel the rapid beating of her heart, the warmth of her breath. She carried the wolf through her open cabin door and set her down gently near her pups. The wolf immediately nosed each pup, checking them, reassuring herself they were alive. The smallest one made a weak sound, almost a mew, and burrowed closer to its mother. Jocey stepped back and looked at what she'd done. 4 wolves in her cabin, a mother and her young. Wild animals who should be in the forest, not huddled by a human's fire. But they were here now, and there was no going back. She closed the door against the cold and went to her food stores. She had 2 more cans of tuna, some dried venison from a deer a hunter had given her, in exchange for helping find a tracking site years ago, and half a rabbit from her last successful trap. She opened the tuna and set it in a bowl near the mother wolf. She tore the venison into small pieces for the pups. The mother wolf ate slowly, watching Jocey the entire time. The pups were too weak to eat at first, but Jocey dipped her fingers in the tuna water and let them lick it off. The salt and fat seemed to revive them slightly. After a few minutes, they began to nibble at the venison pieces. Jocey sat back against the cabin wall and watched them. The fire crackled. Outside, wind pushed more snow against the windows. Inside, 4 wild creatures ate her food and began, just barely, to recover. The smallest pup finished eating first and crawled into Jocey's lap, curling up in the folds of Malcolm's blanket. It was so small, so fragile. She could feel every bone. She put her hand on its side and felt the too fast heartbeat, the too shallow breathing. "You're going to make it," she whispered to the pup. "All of you. I promise." It was a promise she had no business making, a promise that might be impossible to keep, but she made it anyway. Because sometimes that's what you do when you're broken, and something more broken needs you. The mother wolf finished eating and lay down, her head on her paws, watching Jocey hold her smallest pup. Their eyes met again, and this time there was something new in the wolf's gaze. Recognition, understanding, one mother to another. Jocey looked down at the pup in her lap, at Malcolm's blanket wrapped around its small body, and felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been frozen since the hospital, since the funeral, since she'd driven up here intending to disappear. She was crying. She didn't know when she'd started, but tears were running down her face, hot and unstoppable. "I lost mine too," she told the wolf. "A long time ago. Too small, too early. I know what it costs." The wolf just watched, yellow eyes unblinking. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing them all in together. Inside, the fire burned warm. And for the first time since Malcolm died, Jocey Flint felt something other than emptiness. She felt needed. The first morning with wolves in the cabin felt like waking up in someone else's life. Jocey opened her eyes to grey dawn light and the sound of small bodies shifting near the fire. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in Boise, that Malcolm was making coffee in the kitchen, that everything was normal. Then she saw the mother wolf watching her from 6 feet away, and reality settled back into place. The wolf hadn't moved far during the night. She'd stayed close to her pups, who were piled together on Malcolm's blanket like a heap of dark fur and oversized paws. The smallest one, the one Jocey had held, was tucked between its siblings, breathing more steadily than it had yesterday. That was something. Jocey sat up slowly, making no sudden movements. The wolf's ears tracked her, but she didn't growl or show teeth, just watched with that steady, evaluating gaze that wolves had. Jocey had seen it 1,000 times in the field, but never from inside a cabin, never from something that should have been an arm's length away. She'd spent years tracking wolves, observing them from safe distances, documenting their behaviors for official reports. She knew what they ate, where they denned, how they raised their young. She knew pack dynamics and territory ranges and mating patterns. But none of that professional knowledge had prepared her for sharing a 12 by 14 foot space with 4 of them. The cabin suddenly felt very small. Jocey stood and added wood to the fire, moving carefully, keeping her gestures slow and unthreatening. The mother wolf watched but didn't react. The pups stirred at the sound but didn't wake. Outside, the world was still locked in white. The storm had passed, but it had left at least 2 feet of snow in the clearing, maybe more in the drifts. The old logging road would be impassable for weeks, maybe until spring if more storms came. They were truly isolated now. No way out. No one coming in. Jocey filled her kettle with snow and set it on the stove to melt for water. She had a hand pump well behind the cabin, but it would take work to dig it out, and she needed to keep the wolves calm first. Establish a routine. Create boundaries. She used an old bookshelf to section off a corner of the cabin, creating a space for the wolves. It wasn't much, just a visual barrier, something to give them their own territory. She moved Malcolm's blanket into that space, and the mother wolf immediately understood. She gathered her pups with gentle nudges and moved them behind the bookshelf. The pups complained with small yips and whines, but they followed. "Good," Jocey said softly. "That's your space. This is mine. We'll figure out how to share." She knew she was talking more to herself than to the wolf. The sound of her own voice helped. She'd been silent for so long up here, and the silence had been swallowing her. Now she had a reason to speak, even if her only audience was a wolf who couldn't understand the words. The water boiled. Jocey made weak coffee and stood by the window, drinking it and watching the snow-covered clearing. She thought about her supplies. She'd planned for 1 person living frugally for 3 months. Now she was feeding 4 wolves. The math didn't work. The smallest pup emerged from behind the bookshelf, sniffing cautiously. It saw Jocey and froze, ears back, ready to bolt. She stayed very still, holding her coffee cup, not looking directly at the pup. After a moment, it took another step. Then another. It was braver than its siblings, or maybe just more desperate. Jocey set down her cup and knelt slowly. The pup stopped. They regarded each other for a long moment. The old woman and the young wolf, both testing boundaries. From behind the bookshelf came a low, warning growl. The mother wolf appeared, moving stiffly on her injured leg, positioning herself between Jocey and the pup. The message was clear. "You helped us, and I'm grateful. But these are still my children." "I know," Jocey said. "I'm not going to hurt them. But they need to eat." She went to her food stores and pulled out the last can of tuna and the rest of the dried venison. It wasn't enough. She'd need to check her trap line today, storm or no storm. They all needed protein. She opened the tuna and divided it into 2 bowls, one for the mother, one for the pups to share. She set them down in the neutral space between her area and theirs. The mother wolf approached cautiously, sniffed the bowl, then began to eat. She ate quickly, defensively, like something that hadn't eaten regularly in a long time. The pups tumbled forward, all 3 of them going for their bowl at once. There was squabbling, small growls, the bold one shouldering aside its siblings to get the biggest pieces. Jocey watched them and felt something loosen in her chest. They had personalities, these pups. The bold one was probably male, she thought. The shy one hung back until its siblings had eaten their fill. And the smallest, the one she'd wrapped in Malcolm's blanket, ate with fierce determination despite its weakness. A fighter. "Shadow," she said quietly, looking at the smallest pup. "I'll call you Shadow." The bold one she named in her mind as Bold, knowing it was unimaginative but accurate. The shy one became Shy. Simple names, private names. She wouldn't say them aloud. They needed to stay wild, stay wolves. Names made things into pets, and pets didn't survive in the wilderness. But thinking of them as individuals helped her understand them, helped her predict their movements, their needs. After the wolves finished eating, Jocey pulled on her heavy coat, her boots, her gloves. She needed to dig out to the well, check her trap line, see if any of the traps had caught anything before the storm buried them. The mother wolf watched her preparations with interest, and Jocey wondered if the wolf understood that she was going outside, going away. Would she panic? Would she try to leave? "I'll be back," Jocey told her. "I promise. I'm just getting water and food." She opened the door and stepped out into the brilliant white world. The cold hit her like a fist, stealing her breath. Behind her, she heard movement, a soft whine. She turned to see the mother wolf standing in the doorway, looking out at the snow, at the forest beyond. For a moment, Jocey thought she might bolt, might gather her pups and disappear back into the wilderness, but the wolf just stood there, breathing the cold air, yellow eyes scanning the tree line. Then she turned and limped back into the cabin, back to her pups, back to warmth and safety. Jocey closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. The wolf had chosen to stay, had chosen this fragile shelter over freedom. That choice meant something. It meant trust, however tentative. It meant responsibility. It meant Jocey couldn't fail them. She pushed off from the door and started digging her way to the well, snow flying from her shovel in great white arcs. Her breath steamed in the frozen air. Her muscles burned. She was 62 years old, alone in the wilderness, harboring wild wolves in her cabin, and she'd never felt more alive. Malcolm would have understood. He would have done the same thing. She could almost hear his voice in the wind. "Don't forget to live, Joss." She wasn't forgetting anymore. 1 week into their arrangement, Jocey established a routine that felt almost normal. She woke with the dawn, added wood to the fire, melted snow for water. The wolves woke when she did, the pups stretching and yawning, showing needle-sharp teeth that would one day be weapons, but now were just endearing. The mother wolf was slower to rise, her injured leg stiff in the mornings. She always watched Jocey first, assessing, before tending to her young. Jocey had found Malcolm's old wooden whistle in the bottom of her pack, a simple thing he'd carved from pine during a long stakeout one winter. He'd used it to signal her when they were working separately in the forest, a way to communicate across distances without shouting and scaring the wildlife. Now she used it to signal feeding times. She'd blow 2 short notes, then set out whatever food she'd prepared. The wolves learned quickly. By the 3rd day, they'd come when she whistled, emerging from behind the bookshelf with cautious anticipation. By the 5th day, the pups were wagging their tails. It was Bold who approached her first. Jocey was sitting near the fire, working on repairing a tear in her coat, when the pup crept forward. He was bigger than his siblings, Rangier, with a white patch on his chest that marked him clearly. He came close enough to sniff her boots, his black nose working, processing her scent. She stayed very still, needle and thread forgotten in her lap. Bold sniffed her boot, then her knee. Then, in a moment of pure boldness that matched his name, he sniffed her hand. The mother wolf growled from across the room. A warning. Bold's ears went back, but he didn't retreat. He was testing boundaries, figuring out his world. Jocey understood. She'd raised enough puppies back when she and Malcolm had kept working dogs. The bold ones were always the first to explore, the first to get into trouble, the first to learn. "It's all right," Jocey said softly, to the mother. To Bold, to herself. "We're just saying hello." She didn't reach for the pup, didn't try to pet him, just let him satisfy his curiosity. After a moment, Bold wandered back to his mother. Mission accomplished. He'd investigated the strange 2-legged creature and survived. That made him brave in his own small world. The mother wolf relaxed, settling back down, but Jocey noticed the look in her eyes, a mixture of wariness and resignation. She couldn't protect her pups from everything, especially not from the human who controlled the food and warmth they needed to survive. Jocey went back to her sewing, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd been out to check her trapline that morning, trudging through hip-deep snow, and had found one trap sprung with a young rabbit. Not much, but something. She'd also found wolf tracks, not from her wolves but from others. A pack, maybe, or lone wolves hunting the same territory. The tracks had been old, filled partially with fresh snow, but they reminded her that this forest wasn't empty. Her wolves weren't the only ones trying to survive out here. She thought about the mother wolf's injury, the permanent hitch in her gait. In a pack, an injured wolf might be protected by family members, fed and cared for until she healed. But a wolf alone with pups, unable to hunt effectively, would struggle, would starve. The fact that this wolf had made it this far was testament to her determination, her will to survive for her young. Jocey looked at the wolf and made a decision. She crossed to where Malcolm's pack hung on a peg by the door and pulled out his old field knife. She'd been avoiding this, telling herself it wasn't necessary, but she'd seen how the mother wolf flinched when she moved certain ways. Something was bothering her beyond the old leg injury. She approached the wolf slowly, the knife held loosely in her hand. The wolf's eyes followed the blade, and her lips pulled back slightly from her teeth. Not a threat, just nervousness. "I know," Jocey said. "I know it looks bad, but I need to check something. That scar on your neck, there's something in it." She knelt at a distance that felt respectful, giving the wolf space to bolt if she wanted to. But the wolf didn't bolt, she just watched, tense and uncertain. Jocey set the knife down where the wolf could see it wasn't hidden. Then she held out her hand, palm up, empty. Waited. The seconds stretched, the fire crackled, the pups played with each other behind the bookshelf, oblivious to the tension. Finally, the mother wolf lowered her head slightly. Not submission, exactly. More like acknowledgement. A nod between equals. Jocey moved forward slowly and touched the thick scar tissue around the wolf's neck. She could feel it now. Something hard beneath the fur and skin. Something that didn't belong. The wolf flinched but didn't pull away. Jocey parted the fur carefully. There, embedded in the scar tissue, was a small piece of metal with a serial number stamped into it. Part of a collar. A tracking collar, she realized with a shock. This wolf had been collared by humans, and somehow the collar had broken, but a piece had remained behind, working its way into the skin. "You were tagged," Jocey murmured. "Someone was tracking you." Questions flooded her mind. Who had collared this wolf? When? Why? Was she part of a study, a reintroductions program? And if she was still being tracked, would someone come looking? The implications made Jocey's stomach tighten. If this wolf was part of an official program, then harboring her was probably illegal. Fish and Game would want to know where she was, what had happened to her. And if they found out Jocey was keeping her, feeding her, sheltering her, there would be consequences. But those were problems for another day. Right now, she had a piece of metal embedded in a wolf's neck, and it needed to come out before it caused infection. Jocey retrieved the knife and held it in the fire for a minute, sterilizing the blade as best she could. The wolf watched with those yellow eyes, understanding somehow that pain was coming but necessary. When Jocey returned and touched the blade to the scar tissue, the wolf's body went rigid, but she didn't snap or bite. It took less than a minute. The fragment was shallow enough that Jocey could lever it out with the knife tip. It came free, with a small welling of blood that she cleaned with snow and a torn strip of clean cloth. The wolf endured it all in silence, her only acknowledgement a soft whine when it was done. Jocey held the collar fragment in her palm, studying the serial number. Evidence. Proof that this wolf had a history, a past that involved humans. She should report it. Should contact Fish and Game, explain the situation, ask for guidance. Instead, she put the fragment in her pocket and returned to her side of the cabin. The wolf licked at the cleaned wound, then settled down with her pups. The injury would heal now, properly this time, without foreign metal poisoning her body. That evening, Jocey stood on her porch and blew the feeding whistle twice. She heard movement inside, the soft pad of paws, the scuffle of pups jostling each other. She went back in and set out their dinner. The rabbit meat split 4 ways, some cooked rice she'd made for herself that she shared. The wolves ate. Jocey watched them. Bold came close enough to eat from her hand, his sharp puppy teeth gentle on her palm. Shy hung back, but watched with interest. Shadow, always fighting, always determined, ate until his small belly was round. Outside, night fell over the mountains. Inside, the fire burned warm. And for the first time, Jocey let herself think the thought she'd been avoiding. She wasn't ready to let them go. She wasn't ready to be alone again. The drive to Pine Ridge took 2 hours on roads that had been partially cleared by county plows. Jocey left at dawn, after setting out enough food to keep the wolves content while she was gone. The mother wolf watched her pack supplies with something that looked like anxiety, and Jocey found herself explaining her plans out loud. "I'll be back before dark," she told the wolf. "I promise. I just need supplies, food, medicine, things we both need." The wolf just stared at her with those knowing yellow eyes, and Jocey wondered, not for the first time, how much the animal actually understood. The highway wound down through pine forests, heavy with snow, past turn-offs to summer cabins that stood empty and dark. Jocey's truck was old but reliable, and Malcolm had made sure it had good snow tires. She'd been dreading this trip, dreading people, questions, the weight of social interaction. But necessity drove her forward. They were nearly out of food. Her traps hadn't been productive. She needed to resupply or they'd all starve. Pine Ridge appeared around a bend, like something from another era. A single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, American flags hanging limp in the cold air, trucks angled into parking spaces in front of the general store and the diner. Population maybe 300, spread out across the surrounding valley. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Jocey parked in front of Tierney's general store and sat for a moment, gathering herself. Through the store's front window, she could see people inside. Locals shopping, talking, living their ordinary lives. She felt like an imposter. Someone who'd stepped out of the regular world and wasn't sure how to step back in. She forced herself out of the truck. The store's warmth hit her like a wave when she opened the door. Country music played low on a radio behind the counter. The smell of coffee and sawdust and old wood filled her nose. Buck Tierney stood at the register, ringing up a purchase for an older woman Jocey didn't recognize. "Jocey Flint," Buck said, surprise clear in his voice. "Heard you were up at the old cabin. How are you managing?" "Managing fine," Jocey said, pulling a cart from the stack by the door. "Just need to restock some supplies." "Terrible thing about Malcolm," Buck continued, his voice dropping to that particular tone people used when discussing death. "He was a good man. Real good man. Yes, he was." Jocey moved toward the canned goods aisle before Buck could say more. She didn't want condolences, didn't want to discuss it. She just wanted to get her supplies and leave. She moved through the store methodically, filling her cart. Canned tuna, beans, rice, flour. More coffee. Real coffee this time, not the dregs she'd been rationing. Protein bars, jerky, extra batteries for her flashlight. She grabbed gauze and antiseptic, thinking of the mother wolf's neck wound. Then she paused at the meat counter. "Can I get 10 pounds of ground beef?" she asked the butcher. "Cheapest you've got." The butcher, a young man with a scraggly beard, looked surprised. £10? That's a lot of meat for one person." "I'm stocking up," Jocey said. "Winter's long." As he wrapped the meat, Jocey's attention was drawn to a bulletin board near the counter. Flyers and notices covered it. Community events, items for sale, job postings. But one notice in particular caught her eye. Wolf warning it read in bold letters. Below that, multiple wolf sightings reported in Bitterroot region. Livestock losses confirmed. Residents advised to secure animals and report any wolf activity to Fish and Game. Hunting permits available for problem wolves. Contact Travis Coburn, licensed predator control specialist. Jocey's stomach dropped. She moved closer to read the smaller print. The notice listed specific areas where wolves had been seen, and one of them was less than 5 miles from her cabin. "Damn wolves been causing trouble all season," a voice said behind her. Jocey turned to find a man in his 50s studying the same notice. He wore a rancher's uniform, worn jeans, work boots, a heavy canvas coat. His face was weathered, suspicious. "Lost 2 calves last month," the man continued. "Found 'em torn up in the north pasture. Fish and Game says it's wolves from that reintroduction program they did a few years back. Like we needed more predators in these mountains." "Sometimes wolves get blamed for losses that aren't their fault," Jocey said carefully. "Coyotes, dogs, even mountain lions can be mistaken for wolf kills." The man's eyes narrowed. "You defending wolves?" "I'm just saying it's important to be accurate. I used to work for Fish and Game. I've seen a lot of misidentified kills." "Well, these were wolves, Mum. I know a wolf track when I see one. And there's a whole pack of 'em out there, including a big black female with pups. Seen her myself, up near Copper Creek. That's barely 8 miles from here." Jocey's heart hammered against her ribs. Copper Creek was close to her cabin. Very close. "Travis Coburn's tracking her," the man went on. "Says she's got a gimpy leg. Makes her easier to follow. He'll get her soon enough. Get rid of the whole problem." The butcher returned with her wrapped meat, and Jocey took it with hands that she had to concentrate on keeping steady. She mumbled something polite to the rancher and moved toward the checkout, her mind racing. Travis Coburn, a predator control specialist actively hunting a black female wolf with pups and an injured leg. Her wolf. They were hunting her wolf. Buck rang up her purchases, making small talk that Jocey barely heard. She paid in cash, loaded everything into a cart, and was heading for the door when it opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, lean, with a hunter's weathered face and cold grey eyes. He wore a heavy coat and carried himself with a kind of casual confidence that Jocey recognized, the confidence of someone who was very good at what they did and knew it. His gaze swept the store and landed on her, and something in his expression made her skin prickle. "Mrs. Flint," Buck called from behind the counter. "You met Travis Coburn? He's helping folks with their wolf problem." Travis extended a hand. Jocey had no choice but to shake it. His grip was firm, assessing. "Heard you're staying up at the old Flint cabin," Travis said. "That's pretty remote country. You see any wolves up that way?" "Haven't seen much of anything," Jocey said, keeping her voice level. "Been mostly snowed in." Travis's eyes were too sharp, too knowing. "Well, you keep an eye out. There's a female black wolf with pups we've been tracking. Dangerous animal. Pack member killed a rancher's livestock. She's injured, probably desperate. That makes her unpredictable. You see her, you call Fish and Game right away. Don't approach her." "I know better than to approach wolves," Jocey said. "Like I told Buck, I used to work for Fish and Game." "Then you know how important it is to control problem animals before they habituate to humans." Travis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "These wolves, they're from that failed reintroduction program. Most of them got shot by locals who didn't want them here in the first place. This black female, though, she's smart, survived longer than the rest of her pack, but her time's running out." Jocey forced herself to nod, forced herself to stay calm. "I'll keep an eye out." "You do that." Travis stepped aside to let her pass. "And if you hear anything, see anything, even old tracks, you let me know. I'm offering a $200 reward for information leading to her location." Jocey pushed her cart outside without responding. Her hands were shaking as she loaded supplies into her truck. $200 for information. Travis Coburn was serious about finding that wolf, and he was good at his job. She could tell just by looking at him, the kind of man who knew how to track, how to hunt, how to kill efficiently. She drove out of Pine Ridge with her foot heavier on the accelerator than necessary. The mountains rose around her, snow-covered and silent, and all she could think about was getting back to the cabin. Back to the wolves. Back to the family she hadn't meant to create. The sun was setting when she finally pulled up to the cabin. She grabbed what supplies she could carry and hurried inside. The mother wolf was at the door before Jocey had it fully open, and the relief in those yellow eyes was unmistakable. The pups bounded forward, bold, jumping up to sniff at the bags Jocey carried. They'd been worried. They'd been waiting. "I'm back," Jocey said, setting down the supplies. "I'm here. You're safe." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. They weren't safe. Someone was hunting them. And now Jocey had to figure out how to keep them alive. That night, Jocey sat by the fire with Malcolm's wedding photo in her hand. The picture was creased and worn from living in her pocket these past months. In it, they were young, 30 years younger, standing in front of a courthouse in Boise, with ridiculous grins on their faces. Malcolm's arm was around her waist. Her head rested on his shoulder. They'd looked so certain then, so sure that love was enough. The mother wolf lay nearby, closer than she'd ever been before. Close enough that Jocey could have reached out and touched her without moving from her spot. The pups were asleep behind the bookshelf, their small bodies rising and falling with breath. Bold snored softly. Shadow twitched in his sleep, dreaming of whatever wolves dreamed about. "His name was Malcolm," Jocey said quietly, speaking to the wolf as she'd taken to doing in the evenings. "We were married 38 years. Most of those were good years. Not all of them. No marriage is perfect. But most." The wolf's ears swiveled toward her voice, but she didn't lift her head. Just listened with that patient stillness that wolves had. "We never had children. I got pregnant once, early on. Made it to 16 weeks before I lost the baby. A girl, they said. We were going to name her Anna." Jocey's voice caught. She'd never said that name out loud. Not once in 37 years. After that, nothing. Just couldn't seem to happen. Malcolm said it was all right. Said we had each other. And that was enough. And it was, mostly. But sometimes I wondered. She looked at the wolf, at the way her body curved protectively toward where her pups slept. "You know what it is, don't you? To lose something you were supposed to protect, to fail at the one thing that matters most." The wolf's yellow eyes found hers in the firelight. For a moment, Jocey could have sworn the animal understood, really understood. "Malcolm died in our kitchen," just collapsed. Massive heart attack. Dead before the ambulance arrived. I was standing right there, and I couldn't do anything. Couldn't save him. Couldn't even say goodbye properly. Jocey wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I came up here because I didn't know how to live in a world without him. Didn't want to, really. Thought maybe if I got far enough away from everything, I could just disappear. Let the winter have me. She set the photo down on the floor between them, an offering, a truth shared. But then you showed up, you and your babies, and suddenly I had a reason to keep going. Isn't that something? Jocey laughed, but it came out broken. A wolf saved me. A broken wolf saved a broken woman. The wolf shifted, lifting her head. She looked at the photo, then back at Jocey. Then, in a movement so deliberate it couldn't be mistaken for anything but choice, she scooted forward until her body was pressed against Jocey's leg. Jocey froze. The wolf's warmth seeped through her jeans, solid and real. She could feel the animal's heartbeat, slower than her own, steady as the mountains. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, Jocey lowered her hand and rested it on the wolf's head. The fur was coarse and thick, still carrying the faint scent of the forest. The wolf's ears flicked back once, then relaxed. She didn't pull away, didn't growl, just stayed there, offering comfort in the only way she knew how, with presence, with warmth, with simple being. They sat that way for a long time, the old woman and the wild wolf, both survivors of losses too deep for words. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls. Inside, the fire crackled low, and something passed between them that had no name but felt like understanding. Over the next week, Jocey worked to prepare the wolves for survival. She knew their time together was borrowed. Spring would come eventually, and with it, the hunters, Travis Coburn and others like him. The wolves needed to be ready, needed to remember they were wild. She started small. She took her old work clothes, things that smelled strongly of human sweat and detergent, and scattered them around the clearing outside. The pups wanted to investigate, but the mother wolf herded them away from the scent with sharp nips and warning growls. Good. They needed to associate human smell with danger. Jocey stopped feeding them by hand. Instead, she set food out and retreated to the far side of the cabin while they ate. She wanted distance between them, wanted to rebuild the healthy wariness that kept wild animals alive. The mother wolf seemed to understand what Jocey was doing. She reinforced the lessons, teaching her pups to be cautious, to watch before approaching, to test the wind for scent before investigating anything new. It was like watching a mother teach her children to cross a dangerous street. The same careful attention, the same life or death stakes. But despite these efforts, the pups were growing attached. Bold followed Jocey around the cabin, tail wagging whenever she moved. Shy had started sleeping near Jocey's bedroll, close enough to touch. And Shadow, brave, determined Shadow, had taken to curling up in her lap during the evenings, small body radiating trust. Jocey knew she should discourage it, knew every moment of closeness made their eventual separation harder. But she was weak, lonely, and when Shadow looked up at her with those dark eyes, so trusting and innocent, she couldn't bring herself to push him away. The snow kept falling through January, sealing them in. Jocey's supplies held, barely, with careful rationing. She supplemented with rabbits from her traps, sharing the meat equally with the wolves. They were a unit now, a household, each member contributing what they could. The mother wolf had started alerting Jocey to sounds outside, her ears more sensitive than human hearing, her instincts sharper. Twice she'd warned Jocey of approaching deer, allowing her to harvest meat that fed them all for days. They were learning each other's languages. Jocey recognized the wolf's different vocalizations, the soft chuff that meant contentment, the low growl that signaled unease, the high whine that asked for help. And the wolf had learned Jocey's patterns, knew the whistle meant food, knew the soft words meant safety, knew the gentle hands would help rather than hurt. One evening in late January, Jocey found herself carving a piece of wood by the fire. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of whittling during long stakeouts. She was making a whistle, she realized. A new one, better than Malcolm's old pine whistle, which had started to crack from use. She chose mountain ash for this one, harder wood, more durable. It would last longer. She carved carefully, testing the sound every few minutes until she got the pitch right. 2 clear notes, distinct and carrying, the same call she'd been using to signal the wolves. When she was satisfied, she hung the new whistle around her neck on a piece of leather cord. The mother wolf watched her work with interest. When Jocey blew the new whistle experimentally, the wolf's ears pricked forward. The pups came tumbling out from behind the bookshelf, expecting food. Jocey laughed and fed them, even though it wasn't their regular time. "It's a gift," she told the wolf, "so I can always call you, even when you're far away, even when you're free." The wolf tilted her head, studying Jocey with an expression that might have been understanding or might have been simple animal curiosity. It didn't matter. The message was clear either way. Jocey wasn't making the whistle to call them back. She was making it to signal them from a distance, to say, "I'm here, I'm watching, I haven't forgotten you." She was preparing for goodbye, and it was breaking her heart. But outside, the snow continued falling, and spring was still months away. For now, they had time. For now, they had each other. For now, in this small cabin in the middle of the wilderness, they were a family, broken pieces fitting together, learning to be whole. Mid-February brought a brief thaw, and with it, a terrible discovery. Jocey was grooming the mother wolf, something she'd started doing weekly to check for injuries and remove ice balls from the thick fur. The wolf tolerated it now, even seemed to enjoy the attention. She'd roll onto her side, exposing her vulnerable belly, letting Jocey work through the dense coat with her fingers. Jocey was working on a particularly stubborn tangle behind the wolf's ear when she felt something hard beneath the fur. Not a burr or an ice ball, something metallic. She parted the fur carefully and found it embedded in the scar tissue around the wolf's neck. A small piece of electronic equipment, no bigger than her thumbnail. Part of a collar. A radio collar. Her hands stilled. The wolf sensed her tension and lifted her head, ears back, questioning. "Easy," Jocey murmured, but her heart was pounding. "Let me see." She examined the fragment more closely. It was definitely part of a GPS tracking collar. She recognized the casing, the small antenna wire still attached. The break looked old, like the collar had been torn off violently, leaving this piece behind. There was a serial number stamped into the metal, F23BR 2023. Jocey sat back on her heels, mind racing. This wolf had been collared, tagged, tracked, which meant she was part of a program, a study, something official. The implications crashed over her like cold water. If someone had collared this wolf, they'd want to know where she was, what had happened to her. And if the collar fragment was still transmitting, even weakly, they might already be looking. She needed information, needed to know what she was dealing with. The next day, Jocey hiked to a high ridge 3 miles from the cabin where she could sometimes get cell signal. It was risky leaving the wolves for so long, but she had to know. The climb was brutal, her 62-year-old legs protesting every step, her lungs burning in the thin air, But she made it. 2 bars of signal. Enough. She pulled out her phone and searched for the serial number. The results came up immediately. The wolf was designated F23, part of the Bitterroot Wolf Reintroduction Program initiated in 2023. A breeding female, released along with her mate and 3 other wolves in a region about 200 miles north of Jocey's current location. The program's website had photos, data, maps tracking the pack's movements. And there was more. Much more. Jocey read through the program notes, her stomach sinking with each paragraph. The reintroduction had been controversial from the start. Local ranchers had fought it hard, claiming wolves would decimate livestock. Despite the opposition, Fish and Game had moved forward, collaring and releasing 6 wolves with great fanfare. Within 3 months, 3 of those wolves had been found dead. Shot. The cases were investigated, but never solved. The remaining 3 wolves, including F23 and her mate, had continued to survive, staying mostly in wilderness areas, avoiding human contact. Then, 6 months ago, F23's mate had been found dead near a cattle ranch. Gunshot wound. The rancher claimed self-defense, said the wolf was attacking his livestock. The investigation cleared him. F23 had gone off the grid immediately after. Her collar stopped transmitting from the release area. The program notes speculated she'd either died or moved far outside the tracking range. Her status was listed as presumed deceased. But she wasn't deceased. She was in Jocey's cabin, 200 miles from where she'd been released, with 3 pups that must have been born during her flight south, fleeing, surviving, protecting her young against impossible odds. Jocey's vision blurred with tears. This wolf hadn't just lost her mate. She'd watched him be killed, had fled with her pups, traveled hundreds of miles through hostile territory, all while wearing a collar that marked her as part of a program most locals despised. The collar that had eventually been torn off, probably on purpose, probably by the wolf herself, trying to remove the thing that made her identifiable, trackable, killable. She was a widow. Just like Jocey. Jocey scrolled further, looking for more information. What she found made her blood run cold. There was a recent update on the program website, dated just 2 weeks ago. It announced that Fish and Game was conducting a search for F23, the last surviving member of the 2023 release. There had been reported sightings in the southern Bitterroot region. A team was being sent to verify her status, and, if she was alive, to recover her for program assessment and potential relocation. The update included the name of the field coordinator leading the search, Travis Coburn, contracted predator specialist. Jocey's hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped her phone. Travis wasn't just hunting a problem wolf. He had official sanction. He was working with Fish and Game, and if he found F23, the best outcome would be her capture and relocation. The worst, given his obvious hostility toward wolves, would be a bullet justified as protecting livestock. Either way, the pups would be taken. Raised in captivity, maybe, or killed as too young to survive without their mother. Jocey looked down at the collar fragment she'd brought with her, wrapped in a cloth in her pocket. It might still be transmitting weak signals. Might have been transmitting this whole time, pinging off distant cell towers, giving vague location data to anyone monitoring the system. She could destroy it. Should destroy it. But destroying evidence felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross, or she could report it. Call Fish and Game, explain the situation, trust the system to do the right thing. But she'd spent 27 years in that system. She knew how it worked. Protocol mattered more than individual animals. Programs mattered more than lives. F23 would be recovered, and Jocey would be investigated for interfering with wildlife. possibly charged with illegal harboring of protected species. She stood on that ridge for a long time, cold wind cutting through her coat, phone in one hand and collar fragment in the other. Below her, the mountains stretched away in every direction, white and silent and indifferent. The cabin was a tiny speck in all that wilderness. The wolves were even smaller, 4 lives that would barely register in the grand scheme of things. But they registered to Jocey. They mattered. She made her decision. She wrapped the collar fragment carefully back in its cloth, then walked to the edge of a steep ravine. She pulled her arm back and threw it as hard as she could. The fragment arced through the air and disappeared into the snowy depths below, lost among rocks and ice and the bones of 1,000 other forgotten things. If it was still transmitting, the signal would come from down there now. Miles from the cabin, far from the wolves, Jocey didn't report the finding, didn't call Fish and Game. She turned her phone off and hiked back to the cabin, each step feeling heavier than the last. She'd just committed fully, crossed from observer to accomplice. She was hiding F-23 now, actively concealing her from the people searching for her. And if Travis Coburn found out, there would be consequences. But when she opened the cabin door and saw the wolves waiting, Bold wagging his tail, Shy peeking out from behind the bookshelf, Shadow running to greet her, and the mother wolf standing watchful and trusting by the fire, Jocey knew she'd made the only choice she could. They were both fugitives now. Both running from systems that wanted to control them, define them, decide their fates for them. Both choosing freedom over safety, connection over protocol. That night, Jocey held Malcolm's photo and whispered to it in the darkness. "I hope you'd understand," she said. "I hope you'd do the same." The mother wolf, F-23, though Jocey couldn't bring herself to use that designation, lay with her head on Jocey's knee. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire burned low, and 2 widows who'd lost everything sat together in the warm darkness, no longer alone. Tomorrow would bring new worries. Tomorrow, she'd have to plan, prepare, figure out how to keep them all hidden. But tonight, they had peace. Tonight, they had each other. And sometimes, Jocey thought, that was enough. Late February brought an early thaw. The snow began to melt in earnest, exposing brown earth and last year's dead grass. Streams swelled with runoff. The logging road leading to Jocey's cabin started to become passable again, and with the thaw came visitors. Jocey spotted the tire tracks first, fresh ruts in the mud leading up the old logging road. They stopped about a half-mile from her cabin, at a place where the road narrowed and became impassable, even for trucks with good clearance. Someone had driven up, stopped, and hiked the rest of the way in. She found boot prints circling her property line, staying just inside the tree cover. Someone had been watching, scouting, studying her cabin and the area around it. Travis Coburn. It had to be. Jocey went back inside and locked the door, something she hadn't bothered doing in months. The mother wolf sensed her anxiety immediately. She rose from her spot by the fire, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in her chest. "I know," Jocey said. "I feel it too." She went to Malcolm's old rifle, which she'd kept unloaded and stored in the corner since arriving. She'd hated guns after Malcolm's death, hated everything that reminded her of mortality, of how fragile life was. But now she cleaned it, loaded it, set it by the door where she could reach it quickly. The sight of it made her sick, made her remember teaching sessions with Malcolm, the kick of the rifle against her shoulder, his patient voice talking her through breathing and aim. She'd been good at shooting once, could hit a target at 100 yards, but that was a different life, a different Jocey. "I won't use it unless I have to," she told the wolf, told herself. But I need to be ready. She spent the next day preparing. She packed emergency supplies: food, water, first aid, matches, a tarp. She studied her old topographical maps of the region, identifying escape routes, places they could hide if they had to run. There was an old shepherd's hut, about 8 miles northeast, built in the 1950s and abandoned decades ago. She'd seen it during a tracking expedition years back. It would be rough shelter, but it was something. She practiced whistle signals with the wolves, teaching them new commands. 1 sharp blast meant danger, hide immediately. 2 short blasts meant follow me. 3 meant stay where you are. The mother wolf learned fast, responding to the signals and herding her pups according to the commands. The pups were slower, their attention spans short, but even they began to understand that the whistle meant something important. Jocey tested their hiking ability. She took them out in the early morning, when the ground was still hard with frost, and led them through increasingly difficult terrain. The pups handled it well. They were nearly full-grown now, lanky adolescents with huge paws and boundless energy. Bold ranged ahead, exploring. Shy stayed close to his mother. Shadow, always determined, always fighting, kept pace with Jocey, matching her stride for stride, despite his smaller size. The mother wolf struggled more. Her injured leg couldn't handle rough ground well. She limped heavily after a few miles, and Jocey had to adjust their pace, find easier routes. It reminded her that running might not be an option. The mother wolf couldn't make a fast escape through wilderness terrain, not with that leg, which meant, if it came to a confrontation, Jocey would have to make a stand. The thought terrified her. On the 3rd day, after finding the tire tracks, Jocey heard vehicles. She was inside, splitting kindling, when the sound of engines echoed through the valley. She dropped her hatchet and ran to the window. 2 trucks were parked at the trailhead, visible through binoculars. 3 people stood beside them, gearing up for a hike. Even from this distance, she recognized Travis Coburn's tall frame, his efficient movements. The other 2 wore official-looking jackets. Fish and game, she guessed. The team searching for F-23. They were coming. Jocey blew 1 sharp blast on her whistle. The wolves reacted immediately, the mother herding her pups behind the bookshelf, all of them going silent and still. Good. They understood danger. But hiding in the cabin wouldn't work. Not if the search team came to the door. They'd hear the wolves, smell them. The cabin reeked of wolf scent now. Anyone with field experience would recognize it immediately. They had to leave. Now. Jocey grabbed her emergency pack and whistled twice. Follow me. The mother wolf emerged from behind the bookshelf, pups in tow. They looked at Jocey with perfect trust, waiting for direction. We're leaving, Jocey said, slinging the pack over her shoulders. We're going somewhere safe. She picked up the rifle, hating the weight of it, and opened the door. They moved into the forest, Jocey leading, the wolves following in single file. She chose a route that avoided the trail, cutting through thick undergrowth where they'd be harder to track. The mother wolf limped but kept pace. The pups stayed close, their earlier training kicking in. They were silent, focused, understanding on some instinctive level that this was serious. Jocey pushed them hard. They had maybe an hour before the search team reached the cabin. Maybe less. She needed distance, needed to get them somewhere they couldn't be found. The shepherd's hut was 8 miles away, across difficult terrain. With the mother wolf's injury, they'd be lucky to make 4 miles in an hour. Not enough. Not nearly enough. But Jocey kept moving, kept pushing, kept leading them deeper into the wilderness. Her 62-year-old body protested every step. Her knees ached. Her back screamed. A sweat soaked through her thermal layers despite the cold. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Behind her, The mother wolf limped on, determined, protective of her young. The pups followed, their tongues lolling, their breathing hard but steady. They were strong. They'd survive this. They had to. After 2 hours of brutal hiking, they reached a dense thicket of deadfall and young pines. It wasn't perfect concealment, but it was something. A place to rest, to catch their breath, to regroup. Jocey called a halt with 3 whistle blasts. Stay. The wolves collapsed, immediately, exhausted. The mother wolf's injured leg was bleeding. She'd pushed too hard, reopened old wounds. Jocey had medical supplies in her pack, but she didn't dare stop long enough to treat it properly. They needed to keep moving. She gave them water from her canteen, each wolf drinking from her cupped hand. She shared protein bars, breaking them into pieces the pups could swallow. It wasn't much, but it was something. While they rested, Jocey's mind raced through scenarios. If the search team found the cabin empty, they'd look for tracks. She'd tried to obscure their trail, but professionals would find it anyway, would follow it. And Travis Coburn was a professional. They couldn't outrun him, couldn't hide indefinitely. Eventually, they'd be found. Unless Jocey gave them a reason to stop looking. An idea formed. Desperate, risky, but possible. If she could lead the search team away from the wolves, give them a false trail, she might buy enough time for the wolves to escape deeper into the wilderness. The mother wolf knew how to survive in the wild. She'd done it before. She could do it again. But it would mean separating. It would mean Jocey going back, facing the search team alone, while the wolves went on without her. It would mean goodbye. Jocey looked at the mother wolf, at the pups she'd come to know as individuals, as family. Bold with his brave curiosity, shy with his gentle nature, Shadow with his determined spirit, and the mother, F-23, survivor, widow, fighter, who'd trusted Jocey with the most precious things she had. "I have to go back," Jocey said quietly. "I have to lead them away from you." The mother wolf lifted her head, yellow eyes meeting Jocey's. For a moment, neither moved. Then the wolf stood, limped over, and pressed her head against Jocey's chest. A goodbye. A thank you. A promise to survive. Jocey wrapped her arms around the wolf's neck and held on, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to be all right," she whispered. "All of you. You're strong. You'll make it." She pulled back and looked at each pup in turn. "Stay with your mother. Listen to her. Be wild. Be free. Be careful." She blew the whistle one last time. 3 long blasts, a new signal. One she'd never taught them, but hoped they'd understand. "Go, and don't come back." The mother wolf hesitated, then turned and limped north, deeper into the wilderness. The pups followed, looking back at Jocey with confused expressions. Bold whined. Shadow tried to turn back, but his mother herded him forward firmly. Jocey watched them disappear into the forest, each step taking them farther away, until they were nothing but shadows among the trees. Then nothing at all. She stood alone in the clearing, the rifle heavy in her hands, her heart shattered in her chest. Then she turned south, toward the cabin, toward the search team, toward whatever came next. She'd made her choice. Now she had to live with it, or die trying. Jocey hiked back, toward the cabin, deliberately leaving an obvious trail. Broken branches, scuffed earth, boot prints in soft ground. She wanted to be followed, wanted the search team's attention on her, not on 4 wolves heading north. She'd gone about 2 miles when she heard voices echoing through the trees. Men talking, the words indistinct but the tone clear. Professional, focused, hunting. She adjusted her course to intercept them, moving with purpose now instead of stealth. They met in a clearing where an old lightning strike had taken down a massive pine years ago. The fallen trunk created a natural barrier, and Jocey positioned herself behind it, rifle visible but not raised, a statement of presence, not threat. Travis Coburn emerged from the tree line first, followed by two men in fish and game jackets. They stopped when they saw her, spreading out automatically in a tactical formation that made Jocey's stomach clench. These weren't bureaucrats playing at field work. They knew what they were doing. "Mrs. Flint," Travis said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. "Been looking for you. Your cabin's empty." "I've been out checking traps," Jocey said. The lie came easily, her voice steady, despite the pounding of her heart. "In this weather? Without a pack? Without supplies?" Travis's eyes were sharp, suspicious. "Interesting." One of the fish and game officers stepped forward. He was younger than Travis, maybe 40, with a kind face that carried worry lines. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Cole Brennan with Idaho Fish and Game. This is Officer Mark Yasuda. We're conducting a search for a radio-collared wolf designated F-23. Have you seen any wolves in this area?" "I've seen tracks," Jocey said carefully. "Old ones, mostly. Nothing recent." "Your cabin smells like wolf," Travis said bluntly. "Strong, fresh. You've got wolves living there, or you've had them very recently." Officer Brennan shot Travis a warning look, then turned back to Jocey. "Mrs. Flint, if you have information about F-23's location, we need to know. She's the last surviving member of the 2023 reintroductions program. It's important we verify her status and assess her condition." "What happens if you find her?" Jocey asked. "We evaluate her health, check her collar, determine if she's thriving or struggling. If she's doing well, we'll let her be. If she's injured or sick, we might relocate her to better habitat." "And if she has pups?" Brennan hesitated. "That would complicate things. The program wasn't designed for breeding this far south. We'd have to assess the situation." "Which means taking them," Jocey said. "Separating the family. Maybe putting the pups in captivity." "Ma'am, we follow protocols designed to ensure the best outcomes." "Your protocols got her mate killed," Jocey interrupted, her voice harder now. "Your protocols released wolves into an area where locals were waiting with rifles. 3 of your 6 wolves died within months. F-23's mate was shot by a rancher who claimed self-defense. Did your protocols address that?" Officer Yasuda spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Flint, we're aware the program has faced challenges, but F-23 is still program property. She's wearing a collar with taxpayer-funded equipment. We have a legal obligation to account for her." "She's not wearing a collar anymore," Jocey said. "It broke off. I found pieces of it embedded in scar tissue around her neck. She tore it off herself, probably months ago." Travis's eyes narrowed. "You've seen her up close. Been treating her?" "I've been observing from a distance, using binoculars. I'm a former wildlife tracker, Mr. Coburn. I know how to watch without interfering." "Then where is she now?" Travis demanded, taking a step forward. "Because I've been tracking her for weeks. I know she's been in this area. I know she has 3 pups, about 9 months old. And I know someone's been feeding them because they're healthier than they should be for this time of year." Jocey felt sweat trickle down her spine, despite the cold. Travis had been watching more closely than she'd realized. He knew too much. "If you've been feeding protected wildlife, that's a federal offense," Officer Brennan said. But his tone was more sad than threatening. "We're not here to arrest you, Mrs. Flint. We just need to know where F-23 is, for her own safety." "Her own safety?" Jocey's laugh was bitter. "You mean the safety of livestock? The safety of ranchers who don't want wolves here?" That's what this is really about, isn't it? Control. Making sure nature stays in the boxes you've drawn for it. This isn't about philosophy, Travis started. Yes, it is, Jocey interrupted. It's about whether F-23 gets to choose her own life or whether you get to choose it for her. She already chose. She left your program. She ran 200 miles to find safety. She lost her mate, raised her pups alone, survived against impossible odds. And now you want to collar her again? Put her back in your system? Officer Brennan held up his hands. Mrs. Flint, I understand you have feelings about this, but we have a job to do. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you know where F-23 is located? Jocey met his eyes steadily. In that moment, she made her final choice. Yes, she said. I know exactly where she is. Jocey reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the collar fragment she'd removed from F-23's neck. She'd kept it instead of throwing it away, sensing she might need evidence. Now she held it up so the officers could see the serial number. F-23 came to my cabin in October, she said. Starving, injured, with 3 pups who were barely alive. She was limping badly. Old injury to her hind leg that healed wrong. This collar fragment was embedded in scar tissue around her neck. I removed it because it was causing infection. Officer Yasuda took the fragment, examining it closely. This is definitely from her collar. The Idaho serial number matches. She was dying, Jocey continued, her voice steady now, committed to the truth. All of them were. They wouldn't have survived the winter. So yes, I fed them. I gave them shelter. I kept them alive. And I'd do it again. Travis moved toward the fallen log, his jaw tight. Where are they now? Gone, Jocey said. They left this morning, headed north into deep wilderness. How far? Officer Brennan asked. Far enough that you won't find them. F-23 knows how to disappear. She's proven that. Travis swore under his breath. You let them go. You had 4 wolves in your custody, and you just let them go. They were never in my custody, Jocey said sharply. They were guests, free to leave whenever they wanted. This morning they chose to leave. We need to track them, Travis said to the officers. Now, before the trail goes cold. But Officer Brennan was still looking at Jocey, his expression thoughtful. You said F-23 came to you in October. That's 5 months. 5 months of living with wild wolves. That's unprecedented. She's not wild, Travis argued. Not anymore. That's the problem. She's habituated to humans now. That makes her dangerous. She was never dangerous, Jocey said. She was desperate. There's a difference. And she never stopped being wild. Every day, she taught her pups to be cautious around human scent. She reinforced their natural wariness. She prepared them for freedom, not dependency. That's not your decision to make, Travis said, his voice rising. You're not a wildlife biologist. You're not program management. You're just some grieving widow who— That's enough! Officer Brennan cut him off sharply. He turned to Jocey, his voice softer. Mrs. Flint, help me understand. You're a former Fish and Game employee. You know the protocols. You know the importance of maintaining wildlife populations according to program guidelines. Why did you deviate so dramatically? Jocey looked at him, this young officer trying to make sense of a situation that didn't fit his training. She thought about how to explain it, about loss and survival, about connection and trust, about the arbitrary lines humans drew between what was acceptable and what wasn't. Because she asked, Jocey said simply. She came to my door with her dying pups and she asked for help. Not in words, but clearly. And I couldn't turn her away. I'd lost my husband. She'd lost her mate. We were both alone, both broken. And somehow, We helped each other survive." She paused, then continued. "Your program failed her. It released her into hostile territory, failed to protect her from hunters, got her mate killed. She fled to survive, which is exactly what any mother would do. And when she found me, I did what any decent person would do. I helped. The fact that your protocols say I shouldn't have doesn't make it wrong. It just makes your protocols wrong." Officer Yasuda had been silent through this exchange, but now he spoke. "The wolves you describe, healthy, wary of humans, capable of surviving in the wild, that's actually a positive outcome. Better than most reintroduction scenarios." Travis turned on him. "You can't be serious. She harbored protected wildlife without authorization, interfered with an ongoing program." "She saved 4 lives that would have been lost," Yasuda interrupted. "F-23 was written off as deceased. Her pups were unknown. As far as the program is concerned, they don't exist." A heavy silence fell over the clearing. Jocey watched the 3 men, saw the conflict playing out on their faces. Travis wanted to pursue, to complete his hunt. Brennan was torn between duty and compassion. Yasuda seemed to have already made his decision. Finally, Brennan spoke. "The collar is recovered. That's our primary objective. As for F-23 and her pups, without active tracking equipment, finding them in this wilderness would be nearly impossible. It could take weeks, resources we don't have." "So we're just giving up?" Travis demanded. "We're filing a report that F-23's collar was recovered, indicating she's no longer trackable," Brennan said carefully. "Her status will remain as presumed deceased. The collar fragment will be returned to the program." He looked at Jocey. "As for you, Mrs. Flint, I strongly suggest you maintain no further contact with F-23 or her offspring. Any future interactions could result in federal charges. Do you understand?" "I understand," Jocey said. Travis's face was red with frustration, but he said nothing more. The officers had made their decision. It was over. They left without another word, hiking back toward their vehicles. Travis went last, looking back once, with an expression that promised this wasn't finished. Not for him. But Jocey had won. The wolves were free, and she'd kept her promise. 2 weeks passed before Jocey saw them again. She'd returned to her cabin that day after the confrontation, expecting to find it ransacked or marked for investigation. But it stood untouched, quiet in the afternoon light. She went inside and sat by the cold fire, surrounded by the scent of wolves that lingered in the wood and fabric, and cried until she had no tears left. The cabin felt impossibly empty. She'd gotten used to the sounds of the wolves, the soft padding of paws on floorboards, the yips and growls of pups playing, the steady breathing of the mother wolf by the fire. Now there was only silence, and it pressed against her like a weight. She thought about leaving, going back to Boise, to her sister's well-meaning concerns and the empty house that still held Malcolm's ghost. But something kept her here. Some stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd see them again. She carved a new whistle from mountain ash, better than the first attempt, stronger, clearer. She carved it during the long evenings when loneliness threatened to swallow her whole, and the act of creation kept her grounded. When it was finished, she hung it around her neck on a leather cord and wore it always. Not to call them back. She knew better than that. They needed to be wild, to live free of human attachment. But the whistle was a promise to herself. If they ever needed her, she'd be ready. She'd be here. She started documenting everything in Malcolm's journal, the whole story, from the first sighting of the wolf to the confrontation with fish and game. She wrote about what she'd learned from F-23, about survival and motherhood, about how saving the wolves had somehow saved her, about finding purpose in the midst of grief. Malcolm would have understood, she thought. He would have done the same thing. Maybe he had guided her to it somehow, his spirit moving through the wilderness they'd both loved, bringing her the thing she needed most when she needed it. She began to think about the future differently. Not as something to endure, but as something to build. She couldn't go back to her old life. That person was gone, changed irrevocably by everything that had happened. But maybe she could create something new. She thought about staying in the mountains permanently, about becoming an unofficial guardian of the wolves in this region, someone who could monitor them from a distance, protect them from hunters, alert authorities when poaching occurred. There was work to be done here, purpose to be found. She started making plans, how to winterize the cabin properly, how to establish a sustainable food source, how to create an early warning system for intruders. She was 62 years old, but she was strong, capable, not ready to be put out to pasture. And then, one evening in early March, she heard it. A howl, distant but unmistakable, coming from the ridge north of her cabin. Jocey's heart leapt. She grabbed the whistle and stepped out onto her porch, into the blue twilight. She waited, listening, hoping. The howl came again, closer this time. A mother's voice, rich and complex. Then smaller voices joined in. 3 adolescent wolves learning to sing, their notes wobbly but enthusiastic. Jocey blew the whistle. 2 clear notes that carried across the valley. The howling stopped. Silence stretched. Then, movement at the tree line. 4 shadows emerged from the forest, the mother wolf in front, limping but strong. Behind her, 3 nearly full-grown wolves who'd been tiny pups just 5 months ago. They stood at the edge of the clearing, not approaching, maintaining the wild distance that kept them safe. But they'd come. They'd heard her whistle and they'd come. Jocey's vision blurred with tears. "You're alive," she whispered. "You made it." The mother wolf, F-23, survivor, widow, friend, sat at the forest's edge and held Jocey's gaze across the darkening clearing. In her yellow eyes was recognition, memory, gratitude, but also independence. She'd come to visit, not to stay, to show Jocey that they were all right, that her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Bold was huge now, his chest broad, his bearing confident. He sat beside his mother, alert and watchful. Shy hung back slightly, true to his nature, and Shadow, brave, determined Shadow, took 2 steps toward the cabin before his mother's soft growl called him back. They stayed for perhaps 5 minutes, just watching, being present. Then the mother wolf stood, and with a last long look at Jocey, turned and led her family back into the forest. Jocey watched them go, the whistle clutched in her hand. This time there was no grief in the goodbye, just peace, just gratitude. They were free, they were wild, they were surviving. And so was she. That night, Jocey sat on her porch long after full dark had fallen. She looked up at the stars, the same stars Malcolm had taught her to navigate by, the same stars that had watched over her darkest days and her greatest hope. "I'm living," she said to Malcolm, to the stars, to the wilderness that held them all. "Like you asked me to. I'm living." From somewhere in the distant forest came another howl, then another, the wolves singing to the night, to each other, to the wild that had reclaimed them. Jocey blew her whistle once, softly. Not a call, just an answer. "I hear you. I'm here." I remember. The wind carried her notes into the darkness, and somewhere out there, she knew 4 wolves heard her, remembered her. knew they weren't alone. She went inside and added wood to the fire, watching the flames catch and grow. Tomorrow she'd start planning for next winter. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to make this new life permanent. Tomorrow she'd continue the work of healing, of building, of becoming whole. But tonight, she simply sat by the fire with Malcolm's journal open in her lap, pen in hand, writing the final words of this chapter of her life. Sometimes the wildest thing we can do is open the door.